Good evening. This is CTV News for Wednesday, June 10th. I'm Byron Scott. Well, Democrats in the House and Senate have introduced legislation aimed at police reform. The Justice and Policing Act 2020 was introduced by members of the Congressional Black Caucus, along with House Judiciary Chairman Gerald Nadler. The bill prohibits police profiling, among other things. Senator Chris Van Hollen is a co-sponsor. He says it targets three key areas.
One is much more police accountability, meaning that we need independent groups to assess police misconduct. It simply doesn't work when you get to be judged by your police peers. Secondly, we want to make sure we collect this data on a national basis so we have more transparency.
Van Hollen says the measure would also do away with absolute immunity for police officers who deprive people of their civil rights. Family and friends say goodbye to George Floyd, and protesters from coast to coast continue to take to the streets. CTV's Gatira Jones has more.
Protests in our nation's capital continue following the death of George Floyd. Here are scenes of Washington, D.C. from over the weekend. Demonstrators young and old took to the newly created Black Lives Matter Plaza across from the White House to show support for the movement. CTV spoke with Dr. Kevin Roy from the University of Maryland about the significance of these protests.
It seems different. The folks out on the street, the feeling is different. And it's really powerful. I'd like to say it's important and heartening, but I know that we're up against a lot to try to address the kinds of issues that needs to be addressed. I think it's important to realize that at the moment, what pushed us into this is the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and a number of folks over the past couple months who've really kind of galvanized communities. But it's also the disproportionate impact of the virus on Black communities, both here in the region and around the country. It's the disproportionate impact of unemployment. I think people have been sitting at home for 3 months, really kind of struggling with their lives, and a lot of things kind of feeling like we're in desperate situations.
Meantime, family, friends, and political leaders gathered for the final farewell to George Floyd in Houston yesterday. Floyd will be laid to rest at the Houston Memorial Gardens alongside his mother. Reporting in Bowie, Gatira Jones, CTV News.
What do cakes and protests have in common? Well, one local dessert shop is showing its support of the demonstrators in D.C. by doing what it does best, providing cakes. Keisha Butts has the details.
D.C. sweet potato cake goes to the front lines of the demonstrations in Washington, D.C. to deliver cakes to protesters. Co-owner April Richardson says she wanted to bring something sweet to a sour situation.
Having African-American businesses on the front line to send a message to the world saying, we need everybody to buy Black. That was my protest, because if you want to talk about being able to change the world, it begins with having economic incentives. It begins with pouring money into communities that have, served as a foundation for America.
So far, D.C. sweet potato cake has provided about 700 treats to demonstrators. It's also delivering cakes to healthcare and essential workers. This is Keisha Butts with CTV News.
The coronavirus pandemic has sparked many people to pick up new hobbies while at home. One of the most popular is gardening, but sometimes Mother Nature gets in the way of a bumper crop. Patricia Vallone has some advice on how to best keep those little pests off your plants.
The cool weather in May forced the growing season to start a little bit later here on the East Coast, but it didn't have a timeline for many of those creepy crawlers. Right behind me is my container garden, and I've had a few issues with some of the bugs out here. So I spoke with the bug guy, the resident expert, who gave me some suggestions on how I can best treat those problems that I have.
During the early part of the season, we'll have an influx of certain kinds of pests, squash bugs, various kinds of beetles, little tiny flea beetles, Colorado potato beetles that have been overwintering in locations beyond the garden. Hopefully everybody took that garden refuse last year and they moved it somewhere far away.
Now, for many young seedlings you put in the ground, they may struggle to fight off some of the pests that want to take a nibble on their leaves. This here is some lettuce that I recently planted, some seedlings that have come up. Now, one of the things that Dr. Ropp suggests is actually putting cheesecloth, and this is something that I bought on Amazon. It's a very lightweight, thin type of material that you can cover it with, cover the seedlings to protect them.
Sometimes you might also plant what we call a trap crop. That might be a crop of beans planted outside that particular floating roll cover where you're protecting the beans you really want to grow. And once those beans get colonized by bean beetles or other particular pests, you can simply destroy that trap crop, and that will reduce the population that can later infest your beans or your cucurbits, whatever you're growing, squashes, when you take those covers off so pollination.
Now, Dr. Raup says keep an eye out for Japanese beetles, which are abundant on the East Coast.
Once they begin to feed on a plant, the plant will release volatile chemicals that will attract more Japanese beetles. So if you can get those early colonists off in the first place, you're going to reduce your damage down the road.
Now, to kill those unwanted insects, Dr. Raup suggests getting an insecticide oil or soap that has the OMRI label, that's O-M-R-I. That way you will keep the beneficial insects and those pollinators that we need so much. From my home garden, I'm Patricia Vallone, CTV News.
Hi everybody and welcome to this CTV Sports Report. Tonight the 2020 MLB Draft gets underway with first round action. The Baltimore Orioles have the number 2 overall pick in the draft, but have not made a decision on who they will pick just yet.
We have not made up our mind about our top 2 players on the board, so to speak, in preparation for the second pick. We have choices that we like, and we're trying to pick between players that we like, and that's a that's a good thing and the most important thing. But we have not made a decision yet as to how we're going to finalize that grouping, and we may not until the day of the draft. We want to do well with the pick. The baseball draft, even when you're picking high, there are no guarantees, and the odds of your pick returning almost no value are enough that you need to consider that possibility. So we don't even high in the draft, we don't think too much about positional need or context like that. We're trying to make the best investment that we can, and you can only pick amongst what the draft is offering you that year, and it's different at the top of the draft every year. Last year we took a plus defensive catcher with our first pick, and that's just not available every year. So there are really good players and really good talents this year, and we're going to make a good pick, but we're treating these guys as individuals and comparing them one against the other.
To the NFL, the league plans on starting training camp in July. New Washington head coach Ron Rivera is back in the office preparing his strategy for the 2020 season.
I've got all the scheduling done. I've got all the itineraries in place, and I've got the practice scripts ready to go. I've given them to our coordinators, special teams, offense, defense, and they're starting to script those and get those ready. In fact, they should probably be done sometime in the next few days. That we'll have everything in place, and then we'll just adapt them to what happens. There's a whole new set of protocols that the league is coming out with that we're going to have to follow. In fact, we have a meeting this afternoon on it, which I'll be going over with our support staff personnel, our trainers, our videos people, our equipment manager, and my director of football operations, Paul Kelly. So we'll go through all those things and check those boxes in terms of what we need to make sure we're ready for. So it's going to be an interesting start to the to training camp. But again, we're still looking for guidance from the NFL and NFLPA as we start preparing for this.
To soccer, MLS has its start date for the MLS is Back tournament, which will take place in Orlando. The event kicks off on July 8th. And finally, the summer swimming season is back in Prince George's County. The Prince Mont League will kick off on July 11th and run through August 1st. And that is your CTV Sports Report.
And that wraps up our CTV News Update. Join us again on Friday at 4:30 p.m. Good night.